What does the kiwi fruit, a woman succeeding in a male-dominated industry, produce, Michael Jordan's trainer, and great storytelling all have in common? Well, my guest today, Karen Kaplan, crushes all 5 of those and tells amazing stories around how her family business in the male-dominated produce industry, and all of the stories around that, how her mom started this company. They were the ones that brought the Chinese goose something, whatever fruit to the United States. They renamed it the Kiwifruit as we all know it today. So great storytelling, amazing business acumen, drive like you can't believe, but also just a genuine, authentic leader. You're going to learn a lot from Karen today. This was a really cool interview. As the firstborn daughter of entrepreneur Dr. Frida Rappaport Kaplan, founder of Frida's Specialty Produce, Karen began working in her family business at the age of 10. Now, after graduating with a degree in agricultural economics and business management from the University of California, Davis, Karen joined the company, full-time. Learning the business from the ground up, she worked just about every department in the company, from running the warehouse to sales and marketing. At age 30, Karen was promoted to president and CEO. And in 1990, Karen and her sister, Jackie Caplan Wiggins, purchased the company from their mother and then later had a very successful exit. But we're going to talk about not just produce and the business. We're going to talk about women in leadership, some of the unique challenges that Karen faced working in somewhat of a male-dominated industry. But we're also going to talk about the kiwi fruit. Yes, you heard me correctly, the kiwi fruit. There's a fun story here that Karen is uniquely qualified to tell. So with that, without further ado, Karen, welcome to the ThriveMore podcast.
Great to see you, Roger. Finally, after all of our technical difficulties.
Yes. That's the computer always decides what it wants to do. Well, today I want you to talk, if we can. We're going to span the whole spectrum here of the highs and lows in entrepreneurship. We're going to talk about again, it's about women in business and also what you feel made you uniquely qualified to be successful in that business and how other people can learn from you. But let's start off with the business itself. If you can talk about, because like produce and that whole supply chain, how food actually gets to somebody's dinner table, people usually don't have a clue. They just don't have a clue. They think it magically appears in the grocery store. So can you talk about
magically appear?
Exactly. Just snap your fingers and there it is. Can you talk about Frida's Specialty Produce and really what your mom set out to do and the genesis of that?
Well, sure. So it's so funny. I was just telling this story yesterday. So shortly after I was born, my mom was looking to go back to work. So this is back in the mid-50s. And she wanted a job with flexible hours so she could be a working mom and she could breastfeed me. And where she worked didn't give her that flexibility. But my dad's aunt and uncle managed a produce company on the downtown Los Angeles wholesale produce market. So she called my aunt and uncle and said, "Do you know of anyone hiring? I hear you kind of have flexible hours and I'm looking for a new job." And they said, "Frida, you called on the perfect day. Our bookkeeper just quit. You can start tomorrow." So they didn't do any background checks or interviews or skill testing. So she started going to the produce market. By the way, the wholesale produce market in Southern California starts about 2:00 in the morning. So she would leave us at about 1:30 in the morning, drive to work. And she was a bookkeeper. And shortly after she started, my aunt and uncle went on vacation. And they said, "Frida, you're a family member. We really trust you. Would you mind coming in a little bit earlier and going down on the produce market and cashiering and kind of keeping an eye on what's going on?" She said, "Absolutely." So my mom comes in and she's cashiering. And you have to imagine 2:00 in the morning. It's dark. It's the 50s. So there's no pants for women. So she's in high heels, pantyhose and a dress and a jacket.
Yeah.
And she notices the stack of mushrooms, fresh, brown, California-grown mushrooms, and no one's selling them. So she naturally just kind of takes an interest in them and starts selling them. And then a couple days after she sold them, more came in. And then she sold those. And it kind of repeated itself for the entire time my aunt and uncle were on vacation. So when they came back, she said, "I really had fun selling mushrooms. So I was wondering, could I come in early every day and sell mushrooms and continue my job as a bookkeeper. So that's how my mom launched her business, or launched her career.
Yeah.
So a few years later, after she'd sold a lot of mushrooms and actually had left that company, she was approached by the landlord of the Los Angeles wholesale produce market, the railroad. And they said, Frieda, this is 1962, Frieda, we've been watching you. We think you have a lot of potential. We think you should start your own company. And there's a vacancy right there in the produce market. And she said, me? I don't know anything about business. I don't know anything about money. And they said, Frieda, we think you have potential. So she launched her business on April 2nd, 1962. Wow. And, I'm wearing kind of a purple color. And I always do that when I'm talking about my former company, because when my mom needed a sign, she looked in the yellow pages, called some guy up and said, I need a sign over my new place. And when she showed up on Monday morning, the sign was a pale purple. And he said it was the only color he had on the truck. Yeah, right. So what we think happened is he said in the 60s, wow, this is a woman in a man's world. She's going to need to stand out. So instead of a blue or black or yellow or red sign, I'm going to make it look a little more distinctive, a little more feminine. So we're kind of happy he didn't pick pink.
Yeah.
A pale lavender, which actually became our company color. And in fact, the perfect contrast, if you think about walking in a produce department with the green and the yellow and the reds and the oranges, what's the best color contrast in terms of marketing? It's purple. So our packaging and our branding stood out. So getting back to the Kiwifruit. So my mom had launched her business, and one of the buyers was walking down the walk, 2:00 in the morning. The buyers used to come by and bark their orders out to all the salespeople. And this guy said to my mom, I had a consumer call one of my stores in Salt Lake City, and a consumer just returned from a mission in New Zealand, and they're looking for this, I don't even know what it is. It's called the Chinese Gooseberry. Do you know what those are? And my mom said, no, but let me see what I can find out. Of course, she'd never heard of a Chinese gooseberry. Sure. So as luck would have it, about a month later, a local importer had a telex. So that's before faxes, before wires and emails. He had a telex, and he was walking the market going from place to place, and everyone told him no. But when he got to Frieda, he said, Frieda, I have the opportunity to import this fruit I've never heard of from New Zealand called the Chinese gooseberry. Would you be interested? And she said, Chinese gooseberry, how many do you have? He said, I have 200 boxes. And she said, I'll take them all. I already have my first customer. So of course, the Chinese gooseberry, who's ever heard of a Chinese gooseberry? Yeah. It's not from China. It's not a gooseberry. So she's the person who renamed it the Kiwifruit.
I'll be darned.
And of course, the rest is marketing history. So if you could just imagine back in the 60s, when this is the first new fruit since the banana, which came in the 1860s, it's brown and fuzzy on the outside and hard and green on the inside. It was a challenge to sell, but my mom, super open-minded, always promotion-oriented. She was the only woman in the industry, so she really stood out and had unique products, and that's the story.
Oh, I love it. I just love that. Sometimes, obviously, luck is preparedness meeting opportunity, and your mom was prepared and was ready for, this opportunity. But I just love how she was so entrepreneurial and would take that risk. I'll take 200 boxes. I haven't even seen it, but I'm ready to go. And I know I have one customer at least. I love that.
My mom, we were fortunate to produce a documentary movie about my mom when she was about 90. She passed away when she was 96. And one of the famous quotes that came out of that movie, the movie is Fear No Fruit, by the way, was she said, success came to me because I did not see any obstacles. And I would say in general, in her entire career, and then I would say in my own career, I just didn't see the obstacles. And so she didn't know no one would buy kiwi fruit or Chinese gooseberry. She didn't know a woman didn't drive to work at 2:00 in the morning and work till 5 in the afternoon and then go home and her oldest daughter would make dinner every night. I mean, who knew?
Yeah. I love that. Didn't see any obstacles. as we record this podcast, tomorrow I'm flying to go meet 9 other CEOs for a mastermind. I'm just part of it. And some of our homework before we get there is, I'll list these three things, three challenges. What are the three things that are standing in your way of reaching the ultimate success you're looking for? And I literally answered 1, 2, and 3, me, and me.
Right here between the ears.
Yeah.
Right?
It's the older I get, the more I realize that is 100% truth. People don't believe in manifestation. It is 100% real. If you want to be, a decamillionaire, you will be. If you want to be 100 millionaire, you will be. If you want to be a billionaire, you will be. If you're willing to put in the work, but if you actually believe it, are we going to Mars? I think so, because Elon Musk actually believes we're going to Mars. He believes it. And when there's somebody that believes and they don't see the obstacles, you can't stop them. You can't stop them. And your mom's a great example of that. So following college, you started working there you started when you were 10 years old, which I loved, working in the family business. I think that teaches work ethic, teaches
did a lot of filing and sorting.
Sure, of course. Filing, sorting, and sweeping and all that stuff, right? Like that counts. After you graduated, you start there. Tell me about the first couple of years as actually working full time in the business as a professional.
So when I was a sophomore in college, I'd gone to UC Davis my first year, and then I transferred to Mills College in Oakland, California, which is one of the few women's colleges at the time. I've had a friend there, and I kind of was trying to find myself. And I remember my mom's general manager was up in the Bay Area in California and stopped by and took me to dinner. And during dinner, he said, Karen, I'm going to be retiring in a few years. And I know your mom's going to be looking for someone to help run the business. And I think you might want to think of that as a career. And this is someone who wasn't college educated. Here I was at college thinking I was pre-med, pre-law, pre-something back then. And said, thank you, Richard. And I remember going home and literally that night sitting up in bed and saying, well, duh, that's what I should do. I love selling. I worked every summer, every vacation. I love that. I love the food and the produce and the business and the energy at the produce market. So I'll never forget calling my mom and saying, Mom and Dad, I'm going to go transfer back to UC Davis, an agricultural school. I now know what I want to do. And Mom, I want to join you in the business, which of course made it a family business. Yeah. And she was so surprised. She never put any pressure on me or my sister to join her in the business, to work in the business. We were free to do whatever we wanted. But now I felt like it was really my passion. So my mom was so amazing as a mentor and as a mom, because my last year in college, my senior year, every week I got this giant envelope in the mail. And I don't know if you remember in college, getting mail was a really big deal. Yeah. Big deal. No one got mail. And what it was is she made a photocopy of every single piece of correspondence that came in or went out of the company, put it in an envelope and sent it to me so that I would have the mindset for business when I joined the company on October 3rd, 1977. So I came in a little nervous, I will tell you, because we sold, 150 products. And we had all these buyers and there was different deals and prices and, addresses to write down. And I thought, how am I going to remember how to do all that? But like you said, once you jump in, it kind of comes to you naturally. Yeah. So I started from the bottom. So my mom did not believe in doing any special favors. So I literally started in the basement taking inventory where it was refrigerated. So my goal was to talk faster than my pen would freeze. Back then, pens would freeze. And then I did marketing. I did consumer response. So my mom had put invitations on all of our packages to write if you bought a kiwi or a sunchoke or a fresh shallot and didn't know what to do with it. If you wrote to us and told us where you bought it, what the product was, and any questions you had, we would send you free recipes. So I handled those inquiries, between 300 and 500 handwritten letters a week. That's what we got.
Oh my gosh.
But it was great consumer research. So I eventually moved into sales, which my mom let me eventually move up into sales. Someone quit and I kind of moved up the food chain. I already knew what consumers wanted. I knew the products. I had a good sense of things. And then, of course, that's when I found that I'm a natural born salesperson. And so it kind of took off. And my mom, and I feel this is different with a mother working with a daughter, not 100% of the time, but certainly in my experience, is my mom never stood in my way. Usually in a family business, it's not usually, but oftentimes a father-son. Sure. And every time the son comes back from college and has a great idea, the dad reaches underneath his desk to that bag of wrenches that all dads keep there, and they pull out, they throw a wrench at the son and say, "Oh, that'll never work. We've tried that before. That's a silly idea." Where my mom said, "Oh, okay. Never tried that. Why don't you go ahead? That sounds good." And then if I've made a mistake, which we all make mistakes in business, sure, instead of admonishing me and punishing me, she would say, "Oh, you lost that whole shipment of rhubarb. Let me tell you about the time I dumped a whole load of ginger root from Fiji." And we would kind of laugh, right? And so we kind of collaborated. And my mom was really trusting. So my experience, so I came to work there in 77. By 86, I said to my mom, "I want to be president. Yeah, I'm doing the job. Make me president." Yeah. And she just got out of my way. She realized that her skill set was about promotion, and she loved building people relationships with our growers and with our customers and our employees. And, I had this entrepreneurial spirit, and she didn't like running the business. She would say, "Yeah, I don't like firing people. Karen's good at that." I'm like, "Thanks, Mom." I don't like firing people. But, I had more of a business sense, and I don't know what, just the difference of personality. I had a little bit more of a combination of my mom and dad, and I took over. So my best sales job was I talked my mom into making me president when I was 30. And the company went from literally a local, regional, oriented specialty provider to, by the time I sold the company last year, globally known, nationally distributed company with probably the best known brand in the produce industry. So Frieda's, with the purple packaging still, all kinds of exotic fruits and vegetables, and a reputation that was unmatched. So it was kind of my own little project, I used to say my own little chemistry project. It was like I had my own little petri dish and I could do whatever experiment I wanted. So
that's business, right? That's business.
Yeah. And I did in business what a lot of people weren't doing at that time. Like I did personality testing. I studied neurolinguistic programming. I studied color, studied, personalities, took a lot of sales courses. Yeah. And of course, I know this is hard to imagine, but no one hired women in the produce industry unless they were a bookkeeper. So anytime a woman wanted to get a job in a produce business, it didn't even matter if they were in Southern California or nationwide. Whoever they talked to said, "Well, you should call Frida's. They hire women." And so we grew from just, me and my mom in the produce business to having a sales force that at that time was entirely women. Wow. Because women didn't apply anywhere else. They only applied at Frida's. I mean, we did have a couple men apply. And my first question to them would be, "So you've heard that we're woman owned and managed. Do you have any experience with that? Do you have any feelings about that?" And it was never a problem. I personally think it's better to have balance, male and female. Sure. But we were the only people that had women salespeople. So what that led to was this amazing reputation in the industry of these really smart women that sold things that no one else would sell. And we had kind of the marketing acumen, the consumer insights, what is called now, to convince the buyers why they needed to buy our products.
Yeah. Well, so what would you say, because that from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s, we're definitely getting much better. We still have ways to go as a society, but there's definitely more opportunity, much more opportunity than there was. What did you see as the biggest challenge or challenges in the 80s when you were president, CEO, and you're in literally a male-dominated industry. I don't know how many other industries are as male-dominated as that particular segment. So I can see there's some advantages to that, but how did you work through some of the challenges of that?
Well, the biggest challenge was not being a woman. Because honestly, my mom was brilliant at this. So by the way, all sales were by phone. You didn't call on anyone in person because, everybody was working at their office.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, we would have multiple phones on our desk, right? So who's on line 1? Who's on line 2?
Yeah.
So, my mom would tell the story how she, and I did the same thing.
Yeah.
The guy's got, the secretary says, hey, you got Joe on line 1, Fred on line 2, and there's some girl named Karen on line 3. Who are they going to talk to? These guys are talking to guys all day long. So it was really honestly an advantage to be a woman.
Yeah.
It would get us in the front door. But the biggest challenge was we were selling a product that, number one, the buyers didn't buy, because these were buyers that were more likely to be out playing golf and drinking beer and whiskey than buying produce. So we were sold a really unusual product to people that didn't even know what it was. We didn't have video cameras. We didn't have digital photography. So I would have to be on the telephone describing a horned melon, which is bright orange and spiky and looks like a green cucumber on the inside, or an enoki mushroom, which was like 6 inches long and thin. I can on camera, you can see me describing it. I am by telephone trying to explain to someone words they can't even pronounce. They don't know how to spell. They don't know what the product looks like. And I'm telling them, your 50 stores really should have one in every store. Yeah. So the biggest challenge was selling a product that people didn't think there was a demand for. But we had this secret weapon. And I mentioned my first job was answering consumer inquiries. So we would get these letters, 300 to 500 a week. And they always said what store they purchased the product at. So I would file the letters by the supermarket name. So Kroger and Ralph's and, Fresh Market and H-E-B. And then I would package up those like every 2 or 3 months, and I would write down what did the consumers buy, and then like a little summary sheet, and then maybe any insights. And like if one of the letters is really interesting, and you could always tell the older consumers that wrote because they wrote really long letters, I would send that to the buyer and say, I know you don't think anyone wants these products, but here's 25 people wrote to us in the last month saying they love our products. And, you do evidence-based selling. And so it really became a competitive advantage for us. And then, this is back when newspaper food pages were really popular, and whatever came out on the front page of the food pages was what people came and bought in their supermarkets. I'll never forget when we introduced the sugar snap pea. So sugar snap peas is one of the products that we introduced. Wow. Yeah. And the first, the Washington Post newspaper, the food editor, her name was Marion Burroughs. She was going to write a big story on the sugar snap pea and coming out in the DC area. And she said, so what stores do you think it's going to be at? And we called our customers, and some said yes, and some said no. And we said they'll be at A&P and Giant and whoever else. And so out comes the food page on Thursday. And literally, the supermarkets were not open 24 hours a day. There were people coming in with their newspaper, standing at the front door of whatever the Giant supermarket was, waiting for it to open so they could go in and get sugar snap peas. So one of the buyers, there was a supermarket chain called A&P at the time, the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. And the buyer called my mom and said, Frida, why did you not tell me that the Washington Post is doing a story on sugar snap peas? And she said, well, I did. You did? Yeah, I called you, a couple weeks ago. I said they're doing a story, and you said nobody's going to buy. I'm not interested. He goes, well, next time, don't listen to me. Just send me the product. So we connected the dots like no one had ever connected them before.
Yeah. So how do you, because one thing about that business, even the restaurant business, that like just kind of scares the heck out of me is the perishable nature of the product, right? Like you're selling something that only has a certain shelf life, if you will. So how did you manage the supply chain? Because like the sales part and all that, you've been, you've illustrated how you went about that, and it's brilliant. There's the whole back end of this thing of the operation side that I can only imagine is an absolute bear. So if you could talk to managing the supply chain for a product, for all your products, which were only going to last so long and not that long.
I'm laughing because if I think back to, let's say, the 80s, managing supply chain, okay, everything was on paper.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to know how many you had to go down to the cooler to look. And I mean, it was just, and then I think now, 2024, managing supply chain is all automated.
Sure.
We're not using sophisticated AI tools, but using a computer system, you're code dating products, so you know what the shelf life is, you have tools to forecast what demand's going to be. So you talk to the growers and you're importing it, and you have to manage the cold chain, all that kind of thing. It was an evolution. It was not a revolution. It was an evolution. So I think that back in the day, so the 80s and 90s, there weren't as strict quality standards. So for receiving product, like a supermarket, at their warehouse they were receiving it, they weren't as picky because honestly, they didn't even know what they were looking for, or looking at. So it's definitely requires a bit of sophistication, and it got more and more complicated as, number one, our number of products increased. And number two is as we shipped further and further away. So if we were just shipping here in Southern California to local supermarkets, really wasn't a big deal, right? We just, we got it in today, and hopefully in the next week we would ship it out, and it would be in the store the next day. Yep. But a vast majority of our business now is on the East Coast. So we have to really manage how we store the product, how we package it to optimize the shelf life. Those are technical terms.
Yeah.
Make sure it gets on a truck or an air container or rail for some, to get to the East Coast, to get to the warehouse, to get to the store, to hopefully the consumer finds it within 7 to 10 days. Yeah. So it's pretty complicated, which is why there's so many careers now in operations, logistics, and supply chain.
Hey everyone, as you know, I don't have any advertisements nor sponsorships on this podcast. My only ask of you, the listener, is that you share this podcast with someone that you know, a friend, a family member, a coworker, or a colleague who may benefit from this information, may benefit from today's guest, from the value that they're sharing with the audience, with you, the listener. When you share this podcast and our audience grows, it allows me to book more and more guests who have a great message, great nuggets of wisdom that you can benefit from, and again, your network can benefit from. So please, right now, push that share button, send it to somebody that you care about, and let's get back to the interview. How do you see the I would just say the food supply of our country advancing and changing? I'm not talking about packaged foods and all the crap in the middle of the grocery store, but I always call it the perimeter of the grocery store where the real food is, right?
Right.
How do you, if so, how do you see it evolving? Because things are evolving so fast. Technology is helping to enable, advancements in everything. And I would imagine that fresh foods are being helped by technology as well. Can you share any insight on that?
Well, long ago, my mom and I talked about flavor. The flavor was the most important thing. As opposed to that red apple that looks really pretty red, but it happens to be mealy and has no flavor.
Yes.
So taste was always number one. But, we have a fairly big challenge with global warming and climate change, because the produce that was grown in the Central Valley of California, some of those crops can't be grown there anymore because it's either too hot or too cold or too dry or too wet. So the future of food really is going to be adjusting. There's going to be a lot more seed varieties, a lot more. I'm not a big fan of GMOs, but a lot more biotechnology use to make sure that we have food that can grow in the environments where the soil is the best. I mean, there's a lot of things happening in agriculture, far too much to talk about today. Sure. But I was just at a conference last week where we were talking about greenhouse growing of fruits and vegetables. So typically, you may not know this, and your listeners may not know this, that the majority of delicious tomatoes in North America are grown in greenhouses now. They're not grown in the fields. And that's because you can control the amount of water, you can control the soil, you can control the sunlight, and you just get the best use out of the plants. So I think what's going to change as far as the fresh produce business is, first of all, consumers vote with their dollars. So when they buy food that tastes good, then growers will say, oh, I'm going to plant more of those. So I say to consumers, if it doesn't taste good, please let someone know. If you want to know why there's not that much peaches, plums, and nectarines being grown in California anymore, it's because they tasted so bad. They got really mealy and they had no flavor. And that was because of the cold chain, the supply chain. And so there's going to be a giant shift. I think it's about flavor first, but part of it's also going to be is how do we get the food, and by the way, there is plenty of food, to the right places, to the right consumers. So it's not always going to be as simple as it was before. Like in my own business, when COVID hit, I had about 600 products that we were selling. And talk about supply chain, 600 products packed 5 or 6 different ways. It's a little bit of a puzzle. Yeah. So literally in 3 days, I had to simplify my supply chain. And I went to my team and said, I've looked at the numbers. We're going to go from 600 products to 125 products. This was a Tuesday, by Friday, by the way, because we're going to just offer the best-selling products to our clients, the products that consumers want. And also we can streamline the supply chain. And then, of course, reduce the risk in our business during COVID, because who knew what was going to happen during COVID? And I think that's what's going to happen. People are going to specialize. They're going to say, I can't grow all these things. I can grow, 4 or 5 different things. So, but I do believe it will be focused on nutrition and taste.
Yeah. Just 2 quick anecdotes. I used to do a lot of business in the southern part of France. I had when I was in the pharmaceutical business, big client there. And when we go over there, they would host us for a week, because we go every year for one full week. Wonderful hosts. The French, regardless of their reputation, are wonderful hosts. And I remember Stephanie, one of the directors that would always drive us around, she asked on the way home from dinner once, she goes, hey, do you mind if I stop off at the market? Because this is the last day to get raspberries. And we were like, of course, stop and take your time. And I remember talking to my colleague when she was running in to get them. I thought, that is so different than the US, where I expect raspberries year round. I want them red and I want them perfect and I want them year round. Even though I know they've been shipped from somewhere across the world, there's no way they're fresh. There's no way that, they're as fresh as they could be. And where in Europe, it seems like you eat what's in season. You eat what's in season and you accept that, but you also know you're going to get the freshest, best, most delicious, thing there. And it made me think back to when I lived in Massachusetts for a while, back in my 30s. And we went took the kids apple picking, and I'd never done that. And I remember picking an apple off one of the trees in the orchard. We just collected them in our basket, but I just picked one off and took a bite out of it. And it was like no apple I had ever eaten I think I was 37 when I bit that apple. It was so crazy better than any apple for the 37 years that I'd eaten previously. Bright white inside, not that yellow tinge, and crisp as could be. It just is like this giant, a bomb went off my head. Like, what the hell have I been eating? Like, this is real right here. This is how it's supposed to taste. And I didn't know it. So I think so many consumers, and I was certainly, one of those, thought that what we were getting, especially packaged foods and all that stuff, was pretty good. But man, when you get it close to the supply, close to the beginning of the supply chain or right off the tree, it's amazing how flavorful these things are, and vegetables and fruits and all that. Like, I think if people could eat it right off they would want more fruits and vegetables, because it's pretty darn good,
It's interesting because here in America, we want what we want when we want it.
Yep.
And we don't want to hear that blueberries are in season for 1 month.
Exactly.
Or that you can only get strawberries in the spring. Or potatoes are harvested in the summer and they come out of storage in the fall. Right? We don't want to hear all that. Mm-hmm. So what happens is grocers, want to take advantage of consumer demand. So, and growers want to build their business around the world. And so now you see that basically almost everything is available 365 days a year.
Yeah.
And you're right. Sometimes you get locally grown, which is the best flavor, longest shelf life, most delicious, to sometimes it doesn't taste good, or sometimes it does taste good, but it comes from far away. It's kind of the system we built in the United States for food is we want what we want when we want it.
Yeah. You'll get a kick out of this just because I said Massachusetts. Lived there a couple of years. My daughter was 6 or 7, and we were there. We moved from like Texas, but my wife had made a fruit salad, and kiwi was one of the ingredients in this fruit salad, but the kiwi wasn't quite ripe, so it was a little bit harder, right? And my daughter takes a bite, chews down on it, and she goes, "This kiwi is wicked hard." And I looked at my wife and I said, "We're moving. It's time to move." She is not going to grow up with that accent. Kiwi will always be etched in my mind because of my daughter's Boston accent. We're like, we're moving back to the South. Yeah. Well, if you can, tell me about your stint as a CEO. And then you decided you got to a point where, hey, I think we want to exit, or I think we want to bring on a partner, an outside partner. How do you, because a family, you had a family-owned business and your mom and you for decades. And that's a difficult decision to say, I'm going to allow somebody else in or somebody else to take this business to the net, to on from here. How did you come to that realization that maybe it was time?
So my sister Jackie and I bought the business in 1990. And my mom was still alive. Our mom was still alive. My mom passed away 4 years ago in 2020, like a month before COVID. And she came to the office literally every day until she was about 92 or 93. And my sister and I always said, like, we're not going to be like, wow, okay, we're not working to when we're 90. And I have 2 kids, and my sister has 2 kids, and everybody had a chance to work in the business, but only one ended up choosing that. And that was my oldest daughter, Alex. So and over time, I remember my mom saying, "Gosh, if you sell the business, I won't have a place to go." And I said, "Well, we're not selling it today, Mom, but if we sell it, I'll make sure, you get your office," right?
Sure.
So over time, it was evident that my daughter had the leadership qualities, the interest, and the ability to lead the company. So she kind of moved up the food chain. She started in marketing, moved into sales. She was director of sales and procurement, and then had a baby. And not unlike everyone, and she's 34, so not unlike many millennials, she came back from maternity leave and said, after working with a business coach who happened to also be my business coach, who said to her, "Be sure you talk to your mom." And so my daughter came in my office when she got back from maternity leave and said, "Mom, I have something to talk to you about." She said, "I love the business and I want to work in the business, but I don't want to own the business." And I said, "Good. I'm good to know. I'm so glad you told me, and I respect that because, if you talk about supply chain and our whole conversation at the beginning, it is a puzzle to run a business. And there's a fair amount of stress because you've got all the employees, you've got the produce, you got the growers, you got the customers, you got the government, everybody's involved." So I understood why she didn't want that stress. So I went to my sister and said, "Well, plan A ain't going to work. So we should go to plan B." So plan B was, we talked about that we were both tired. This was during COVID, but we had already had discussions. We had planned to transition the business. It wasn't specific what we were going to do, the timing rather. Because I didn't really want to rush my daughter into like, okay, you're in charge. So we knew we had a couple options. One option is I could hire someone to run the business, and then Jackie and I continue to own the business. And by the way, I was the majority shareholder. So it was not a 50-50 partnership, which I think is key in business. No 50-50 partnerships.
Wait, just pause right there and please speak to why, because that's very important. I'd love for you to speak to why.
Well, like when you come to an impasse, who decides? Like I've seen and heard of businesses, go to the mat because they couldn't agree. So I was the oldest, and I had 55% ownership. So at the end of the day, although I was really good about collaborating with Jackie, at the end of the day, I was the person that made the decisions. And so what happens when you're not in a 50-50 relationship, business partnership, who's got the majority votes. And it depends on what your leadership style is. If you want to collaborate and say, we're just going to take a vote and everyone has one vote, that's great. That wasn't my style. I would take input from everyone, including my sister, and I consulted with business advisors on big decisions. But whenever I advise businesses, previously or now, it's don't do 50-50 partnerships. And one of my clients right now, he's transitioning in his business and he has 2 people that are going to take over. And he told me they're 50-50. And I'm like, okay, good luck with that.
Get your money out.
It's like when you get married. You have a prenuptial agreement that you negotiate before you get married when you like each other. Because when you don't like each other, you don't have to worry about how you're going to divide things up.
Exactly. Yeah.
So anyway, so getting back to the business, so we had a couple options. One is to hire someone to run the company and we maintain ownership and then figure out what's going on. And number 2, that we sell the business. And neither one of us wanted to keep working because we were tired. I mean, the produce business is not for the faint of heart. I'm sure there are many other industries out there that are tough, but the produce industry, gives you a few gray hairs.
Sure.
But we interviewed a few investment bankers because what I did know is I was good at selling produce, but I had 0 experience selling a company.
Yep.
So on the advice of a couple of people, I interviewed a few investment bankers. We selected one. We were very happy with them. And went to market. I had a time schedule that I set out in my goals for 2022. Yep. And almost to the day, we achieved everything on schedule because I had the goals and I reviewed them all the time. And and so we went to market. We started the process in January of 2022. And then we closed on the sale of our business in January 2023. Now, my daughter, Alex, part of the package was you have the most talented salesperson in the produce industry working at the company. And so the buyers quickly recognized her capabilities and the continuation of my vision of how we grew the business. So she's still working there. She's now the vice president. She got a big promotion and she's doing fantastic. And so, she's continuing the legacy of her grandmother who started the business and her mother and aunt who owned the business for a long time.
I love it. That's great full arc of the story, right? Full arc. So since then, my understanding is you've joined some boards to help advise other companies, and you've also established your own coaching practice, and you're very selective about the clients that you take on. Can you just talk about really how you serve as a board member, what your goal on that is, and then also coaching and what you're getting from that and giving in that as well?
Well, actually, I'm not on any boards right now.
Oh, okay. I misread that.
I serve on a nonprofit board, the International Women's Forum. It's a global organization. But so right now, my focus is on coaching, doing executive coaching. The challenge for me with considering being on boards, whether it's public or private, is it's a very long commitment and it's almost like work, like real work. Because if you're going to be on a board, and for your viewers, if you're going to be on a board of directors, some people think that's their next career. You should think seriously about what that commitment. I have a friend who's on the board of a public grocery company in Canada, and she lives in Southern California, and she spends 2 to 4 days every month preparing for the board meeting, flying to the board meeting, attending the board meeting, doing follow-up work and committee work for the board meeting. And she's out of commission for a week a month. And, she's in her 70s and I don't know that that's what she wants to do forever. So I have steered away from that. Personally, that's just not what I'm interested in. So as far as coaching goes, I took a year off, well, maybe 10 months off from after I sold the business. And that was on the advice of a really good friend who had run a big public company and has served on many boards. Is once you finish that completing your service in your own business, it's really good to take some time to decompress, whether it's to travel or sleep or get to know your friends and your family or whatever projects you want to do. And I have friends who've exited huge careers who have not made that same choice as me. And it'll be interesting to see in a year or two how they're feeling about jumping right into something else when they're in their 60s or 70s. So my friend said, it'll come to you what you want to do. what feels right. So I sold the business in January, spent a lot of time traveling. And it was in about August or September when I realized what I really, really enjoyed was helping other people be successful, to develop their personal executive presence, their leadership skills, to figure out how you run a company when you've just been made president of a company. So I took a few months, developed a website, figured out what my sweet spot was. I don't want to work with public companies. I don't want to work with startups because it's kind of like running a business. I really want to work with executives, minimum 6 months, maybe a year or longer, and help them go to the next level or two in their leadership journey. And so I was very fortunate that in the produce industry, one of the trade press that I had developed a great relationship with did a really lovely story on me. I think it was December or January, I don't remember. And my phone's been ringing quite a bit since
great.
then. And I'm kind of selective. This is a for-profit enterprise for myself. However,
Sure.
I do take a portion of what I get as income and donate it to causes that are really important to me. But I'm selective because if I don't feel I can help someone, I don't want to take someone's money. So when someone's looking for a coach, not a mentor, but a coach, you really need to know what you want, as opposed to, will you coach me? Well, will I coach you on what? Like, where do you see yourself 6 months from now? What are your biggest challenges? What do you see as your weaknesses? So those are the questions I ask people when they contact me or, we interact. And it becomes really evident to me if I can help them or not.
Yeah.
So, I'm really fortunate. I have clients that run companies that are from 40 million to 400 million in revenue. And they all have the same challenges. My expertise, if I was to think of an area of the company, is sales and marketing. And so naturally, if they tap into me just a little bit on sales and marketing, for many business owners, it's like a black box. Like, what does marketing mean? Like, how do you train your salespeople? How do you know if you have a good salesperson? Well, I've done that my whole career.
Yeah.
So that's where I tend to help people. But I look at some of the people I work with on helping them with their executive presence. And I think I've really made an impact. And I think this, Roger, I started blogging back in 2011. So I've been blogging for 13, almost 14 years. And my blog is called What's on Karen's Plate. And I started it, I was inspired by the founder of Whole Foods, John Mackey. He said in an op-ed piece once that I think the CEO of any company should have a voice independent of the corporation. And he got a lot of flack for that. And when I read that article, I thought, I agree with you. And when I met him a few years ago, I told him, you inspired me to start writing. Now we call it a newsletter, but it used to be called a blog. So I used to write about produce. And then I realized nobody really wants to read anything about produce. And so then every once in a while, when I'm blogging weekly, I would write about life. I would write about the challenges of being a working mom. I would talk about what it's really like to work with my sister. I would talk about, something I found on a trip. And people were super interested in those human interest stories. And without fail, when I would write something, it still to this day happens. I'll tell you about my blog 2 weeks ago. I write a blog and I think it's a dud, but I still publish it. And then literally the ones I think that are the biggest duds are the ones I get the most positive feedback on, right? So a couple of weeks ago, I wrote a blog on, does it matter what you wear? Does it really matter what you wear? And I wrote that because I'm on a lot of Zoom calls, which you are on as well. And I noticed people, were pretty casual. In fact, they look pretty shitty. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, people were ripped t-shirts. I was doing an interview with someone interviewing me to be the person's coach. And she had on a sweatshirt with a hoodie and she was slouched down in her chair. She had the background blurred with God only knows what it was. And it didn't leave a great impression for me. So I thought, well, if I'm reacting like that, there's something there. So I just wrote a blog about like what it means. Like I got dressed today for the interview with you. I knew I'd be on camera. So I picked good color. I clean my desk. I don't blur the screen. I put on makeup, all the kind of stuff that you do when you really respect the person you're going to be interacting with. So I wrote this blog about it, really short, and I published it. And literally, I had friends and people I don't know send me screenshots of what they're now wearing on screen. Like if they're going to have a serious conversation, this one guy who's like in some tool business, he had on a jacket and a nice shirt. I have a really important business meeting. I never would have thought about how I show up. Yeah. So I write about things like that.
Yeah. Zoom and COVID it has literally changed the way people view how they should show up for business, and not in the right direction. Not in the right direction, And I'm all for. I wore suits and ties for 25 years, and so I love wearing t-shirts and swishy pants now that I'm in the fitness business. But you still, like you said, you need to present professionally. And actually, I did see that blog on LinkedIn. I'm glad you brought that up. Well, a couple of last questions for you, and then I want to have you share where people can get a hold of you and follow you and find you. I'm an avid reader. People that listen to the show just know that I love reading books. Any guest that has a book, but I find out about it, I read it before they come on. I love reading, and I just learned the power of reading probably in my late 20s. It really came on strong for me. Is there a book, Karen, that you would recommend to the listeners that when you said it could be self-help, business, it could be a fiction book, anything, but that you read it, you set it down, and you kind of had that big exhale of, wow, I am different, better, more suited for what after reading that book? Is there one that you can recommend?
There is.
Yeah, please share.
So there is a book that did that for me. So the book is called Relentless. It's by Tim Grover, and he is the elite coach for people like Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan and all kinds of other athletes that I know nothing about.
Yeah.
And I don't remember. Oh, I do remember how that book was recommended to me. So in my blog, at the end of every year, I always write down, these are my top books for the year. And at the end of the blog, I wrote, this is 2 years ago, if you have any recommendations, let me know. So a produce industry colleague of mine, a woman, sent me a list of her top 5 books. And this book, Relentless, was in there, a sports book. And that's what I thought it was. It's really on leadership and on focus.
Yep.
And I thought, wow, that's not the kind of book I was going to expect from her, right? So I read it, and I was so blown away by the book. I recommended it to my partner, who's also a professional speaker and executive coach. And I said, this book is so life-changing for me that I think I'm going to read it at least once a quarter, and for sure once a year. And I don't read it once a quarter because there's so many books to read. But I will tell you, at least once a year. I mean, I read almost all my books, 99.9% of them on Audible. So when I'm exercising or driving or whatever, I can use the time. And that book is amazing, and just really talked about the importance of being focused. And you've read the book, obviously, by your nodding.
Yeah,
So
I love it. I love it.
So.
He's amazing. He's amazing. Yeah. It's and what I love is he helps you, the reader, get into the mindset of what he calls the cleaner, right? Coolers, closers, and cleaners. And the cleaner, being a Kobe, being the Michael Jordan, Dwight Howard, I think, is some of those other, I don't know all the athletes either, but just their mental approach to the game, to their life, to how they do anything is how they do everything. And one thing that I think he's very clear about is, and there's sacrifice involved. Like, don't think you can be the best or even good if you're not willing to give something, and I loved reading. I've recommended that book too. And he's got another one. I don't think I've read a second one yet, but I love how he gets into the mind of someone that is an elite performer. And then you realize, okay, they have a lot of skill, but they also worked their ass off to get here.
I had no idea. I knew nothing about Kobe at all.
Yeah.
And so when I read that book and saw or read and listened to his determination and his focus and his relentless nature, I understood him better. And of course, I'm so sad that we lost him so early. So you mentioned the quote, which is actually my favorite quote. How you do anything is how you do everything. I have it on my website. I have personal stationery that says that. I've written many blogs about it. And I can tell you for myself, anytime I interact with someone where it's not a fantastic experience, I say to myself, like they're late, or, they show up looking not put together, or they don't turn something in on time. I say, how you do anything is how you do everything. So I know you asked how people get hold of me in case they want
please.
to. So I have a website. So it's my name. So it's Karen Kaplan, KarenCaplan.com. And on there is quotes from people who testimonials of clients I've worked with, a little bit about myself, how I work, with whether it's coaching, I do speaking when asked, and of course writing. So I would love to hear from people.
Love it.
And you can subscribe to my blog, and you can get the movie on my company, Fear No Fruit, on Frida's. I mentioned that, right? It's a full-length documentary, so it's right there on my website.
Oh, perfect. We'll actually put your website in the show notes so people have that. I'm gonna ask you one more question before we wrap up, just because I'm just curious on how you'll answer this. So we fast forward to the end of your life, and you've lived this amazing life. But we fast forward, and hopefully, like your mom, you live this really long life because you're living the width of it for sure. And you live the length of it. But we're at your funeral, and a loved one, is reading your eulogy, and they're only allowed to choose 3 descriptors, 3 words, 3 different words that describe you. What descriptors do you hope that person chooses when describing the life that they witnessed and experienced you living?
Am I allowed to cry?
Of course. Wouldn't be the first time on the show. Yeah.
So, kind, caring, and I think they would say driven.
Yeah. Kind, caring, and driven. I asked that question because it was asked of me, and it had such a profound impact on me, because I realized, okay, then every day I get up, those are the 3 words I should be chasing. Like all the other BS and all the small stuff that we sweat over that means nothing. Here are the 3 words. Like, here are the things I should be doing. And if I don't, how I do everything is how I do, or anything is how I do everything. It's those 3 words I need to show up with. And that's why it's such a powerful concept to think about. Like, if you have to boil it down to 3 words.
Thank you for asking that. That's really.
Yeah. And when we're in congruence with those 3 words, we're living our best life. Best life. Yeah, love it. Karen, thank you so much for joining. This has been just a blast, and you've offered just a different perspective on things. By the way, here's my mom right here. Yes, I love it. Mom.
Yeah, I always have her over my shoulder.
She obviously was, and just sounded like an amazing person, just truly special in so many ways. Yeah, it was neat to hear you talk about her, because you lit up when you talked about her.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Roger.
Thank you for tuning in to the ThriveMore podcast. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for any of the resources that we mentioned during the podcast. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you have access to the latest and the greatest. You can connect with me on any of the socials at Real Roger Martin. And be sure to check out our website, ThriveMoreBrands.com. There you'll find information on the brands we support and information on franchising. Thanks again for tuning in.